Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. And thank you for attending our first Visiting Writers Series event for Spring 2026, featuring poet Evelyn Berry. As a reminder, please silence your cell phones and refrain from using them during the reading, of course, unless you'd like to take some pictures or short videos. This event is being recorded and will be available later on the English program's YouTube page. And thank you, of course, to the Humanities Division and English program at Brevard College for their generous support of this series. In my poetry writing course this spring, we are focusing on the chapbook, that often difficult to define, ephemeral, strange object. Earlier this year, Evelyn Berry's chapbook, Tea for Tea, available over there if you would like a copy, both a celebration and a bittersweet exploration of what it's like to be queer and trans today, was published by Small Harbor Editions. But it was her debut poetry collection, Grief Slut, published by Sundress Publications in 2024, that first put Evelyn on my radar. That fall, a week before Hurricane Helene arrived at Western North Carolina's doorstep, I had the privilege to read with Evelyn her electric and welcoming presence at Punch Bucket Lit. She is hilarious, thoughtful, kind, and sharp in her observations, both in life and in her poetry. With her background and performance, she is captivating to watch. For the past few weeks, students in my poetry writing class have been closely reading Tea for Tea, selecting poems rich with imagery and an engaging voice, while writing their own poems. We have delighted in the lush, and to use a phrase from class, hypotaxic language that fills these pages. I hope you will enjoy experiencing this lushness for yourself this afternoon. Please join me in welcoming poet Evelyn Berry to Brevard College.
Hello. Don't be surprised. I'm a redneck wussy, moonshine sloppy with a limp wrist, town crier, sobbing on the street corner. You'll get used to the lipstick, same like the scuppedine's flesh, sweet pulp. I'm here, sure as roadkill, sure as possum. Night slick, slurping blood ticks. I'm everywhere like a dandelion falling apart in the wind's embrace. I'm haunting the family tree. Same as you. Born to this ecology, this bloodied patch of dirt. Go ahead, spit me roadside like a boiled peanut shell, sucked of salt. Crown me queen of the chitlin strut. Don't be surprised. Young queers have been fucking in the fields since the first sin, first garden delight, first Adam's apple taken in the mouth, first seed spilled if you bury enough wild queers in the dirt. One's sure to sprout in your backyard. Hello, my name is Evelyn Berry. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm very excited to read for you today in this beautiful library at Brevard College. I love Brevard. I came here all the time as a kid. We used to camp at a place called Black Forest Campgrounds, which is right outside of town. And yeah, it's a really meaningful place. So I'm excited to just spend some time here and vibe. And also share poetry with you. It was a delight to chat to the creative writing class today. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for reading the work. I know you were assigned to read the work, but thank you for actually reading it. I know people don't always actually read the things they're assigned, so thank you. And thank you for your great and insightful questions. And thank you most of all to Elise for bringing me here, who is an amazing poet in her own right and a great friend. I'm going to read from this chapbook, Tea for Tea. For those of you who don't know, a chapbook is like a book, but shorter. It is a limited engagement, usually focused around a particular topic or theme. And as I started writing some poems in this book, what I wanted to focus on was trans love, trans communities, trans sex, trans pleasure. It is, a controversial subject, apparently. And so pleasure is something I take really seriously. And love is something I take really seriously. I know that's a really corny thing to say as a poet, that the ethic of one's work should be love. But hopefully you'll see what I mean. I'm going to start with the first poem in the book, and it's called Transsexual Confessional. I forget my own monstrosity until someone reminds me they'll rubberneck my funeral to Sherlock my birth sex. You get used to it, the staring. When starring in your own 24/7 sitcom, the too loud whisper, the obvious gesture, the prying question. I could try to play along, the usable suspect, moonlight as hermaphrodite hermit haunting the wet dreams of legislators, could tell them the names my lover calls me, what they write on my body in impermanent ink. How my mother balks at the body slick songs I whistle true as a godwit, could deliver the rehearsed plea, a past drafted for palatable consumption, but I won't give them that. Won't tell how panic fangs my brain, freeze, calligraphed with tragic stories of how uncertainty and shame beget death. I know how a girl like me becomes a cautionary tale. We recite to help each other survive. No, I won't flaunt the wound to prove I'm alive. When I wrote my first collection, Grief Slut, I wrote so much about childhood, and I was kind of tired about that. And I said, I'm not writing any more poems about childhood or the past. It's all about the future, baby. I also wrote a lot of poems about sex, and I said, I'm bored of writing about sex. It's all about, I don't remember what I just said. I was like, an ekphrastic poetry project, baby. And then I wrote this book instead. This poem is called Self-Portrait as Nothing. Before I was named close to a real man, I performed my lack, black hole, blank spot, gone. Not light of dead stars, tampered crime scene of obscured memory, gendered antiquity, forgotten trinket, I pretend sparkle. Abandoned glitter, search for me back then. Woman I was not. Easily definable, like a numb throat, splatter ink, blot, splotch in the space between this empty body, post-obsolete sex, and pre-op junk shops, mistaken ornate in lieu of good light for shades of the dark. You'll find me missing. Before I was named woman, I was not close to a real man, easily definable. I performed my lack like a numb throat, black hole, blank spot, gone, splatter, ink, blot, splotched, not light of dead stars in the space between, tampered crime scene of this empty body, obscured memory, post-obsolete sex, gendered antiquity in pre-op junk shops, forgotten trinket, mistaken ornate, I pretend sparkle in lieu of good light. Abandoned glitter for shades of the dark. Search for me back then. You'll find me missing. Are y'all on the internet? Do you guys use the internet? Are you familiar? Some of you, you've heard of it. I'm on the internet, and I feel a lot of ways about it. I feel more and more so self-conscious of like who I am online, because I keep meeting people who know who I am online in real life, and then I have to break it to them that I'm not that person in real life. And I'm like, oh shit, hello. I'm like actually a weird, awkward person. So this is kind of about that experience. It's called personal brand. I'm only a slut on the internet, where desire is hypothetical. Online, I aim to be mysterious. No one even knows my name. Scorpio, I write in my Tinder bio. Kidding, I was banned for being transsexual. I'm plagued by the common concerns, dying for one, or dying alone, or dying with so much housework still left unfinished. Like most failures my age, I was smart once. I had potential, or at least something akin to intuition, clarity, purpose, a future of endless promise ahead. I've spent 10 years drunk on the past. I'm a sucker for nostalgia's switchblade. I watch another YouTube video about discontinued Tamagotchis. Let's repackage art as a viral content. TBH, doom scrolling's a great pastime, though maybe algorithms don't love me. Won't you follow me and lick my stratus? I've been thinking of using GoFundMe to crowdfund tit implants, or maybe rent. Sorry, I spent fellowships on hormones. I will practice domestic normalcy. The usual polite conversations, the cost of eggs, apocalypse weather, fascism, the loss of community at the river's edge. On half-eroded stones, moss grows without applause. I'm going to read some poems that are kind of set in the South. I grew up in South Carolina. I still live in South Carolina. And it's a place that I really love. It's not always a place that loves me back, but I love it. And I'm going to read both from this book and this book for fun. And the first thing I want to read, it's funny when you have a new book come out, you have to relearn where everything is. So I'm like, I think I know where things are in here. I think this poem is in this book. I certainly hope so. Country Queers. In the tick-riddled fields beyond the creek, where we skip stones, trade spit and nostalgia, we make of our queer bodies a concert. Cricket choir fiddling their legs at dusk. Bullfrogs from the bog join in, all caught up in backwoods cacophony. Cicadas sing like a fwatwa, washboard steel scraps scraped guitar twang tune to match our crooked mouths. I've known this home since before I was grown. I'm leaving, but not until tomorrow. Here, we are moon luminous and constant as the night's sharp appetite for music. We shed our dead names like rattlesnake skin. We pretend our freckles honeysuckle. I used to play a game when I was a kid called Smear the Queer. Has anyone ever played this? One person. It's apparently outdated when I talk to younger people. This is how you play the game. You have a football, and you throw the football in the air, and one person catches the football, and then everyone else beats the shit out of that person until they drop it. And then you do it again. You guys never played this game? All right. Just me. So I wrote a poem about it. It's called Queer the Smear. Behind the school, we scrum, we bum rush, we hum the slur, sing for brief carnage, we drum skin red, become bruised numb, we limp wrist launch the football above us, spread arms to catch its descent, we thrum with violence, we come undone, no rules except blood. Glitzing grass, parking lot gravel sparkling in sunlight like glitter. There's no other way boys may touch, may hold each other against the dirt. That's it. That's it. Okay, goodbye to this book. It's very beautiful. Like, say ooh. Say ah. I know, it's very beautiful. Silas Bird. Ernest. All right. Did you know that South Carolina sells more peaches per year than Georgia? Some people know this. It's very important to me that you know this. As a South Carolinian, that we sell more peaches than that so-called peach state. We're only half the size. I grew up around a lot of peach orchards, and I think something about peaches that people don't know is like peaches are so fragile. I mean, not only are they fragile to touch, but like they're kind of fragile to farm. And in recent years, we've been hit with a lot of inconsistent weather. We have early springs, like the one we're having right now, and then we'll have a late spring frost. So the peaches will start to kind of bloom early and then rot on the vine. This has nothing to do with that, but I thought it would be a good, tidbit for you. Self-portrait for South Carolina peach. We spent summer nights at the drive-in, necking in truck beds, mosquitoes blood snacking on our bare thighs. We came home late, bite marked. The first time I bruised, I admired skin turning dark like a fruit. Once I puked a bottle of pills into the toilet, fled class, and collapsed on tiled floor. Once a girl offered to brighten my blood. She pressed her lips to flesh. I was still soft enough to ruin. The pollution started young. High on anything I could scavenge from medicine cabinets, frost pummeled the peach orchards. That year I lost the kick of brief bliss. How did I live like this? The memories, decadence, decayed. I just wanted to feel present. Like how, as a child, I'd eat peaches in the backyard. Nectar grown from the same dirt as me. You're all in college, and college is expensive. And I remember college being very expensive, and I made some interesting decisions in college. I had a scholarship and some stipends, and I usually, after paying rent, blew them all on drugs. And that was a bad idea. Don't do that. It's bad for you, and also you won't have any money, and also you'll have very high student loans, even if you have scholarships. So this is about that. This is about the year I graduated college. It was an interesting year in my life. It's called high risk behavior. Has anyone seen that on their doctor's report before? Yeah, okay, cool. You'll get this then. After the second eviction notice, I scrounged for something to sell. Weathered textbooks, derelict t-shirts, antique penny worth $10. Blood. At the clinic, I don't bother to lie on the questionnaire. Say plain my brand of wreck, pills, booze, bareback, reckless ruin strewn through my veins like locusts left dead after feeding on pesticides harvest. My doctor tells me my blood's suspect. Possible pestilence, implicit threat, the body's troubled, crucible, bruised disease. I'm released back into winter morning and exhale hot into my blistered hands, still empty of anything that can keep me alive. I want to read some poems about faith and religion. I'm writing a lot about faith and my spiritual practices right now. So it's kind of interesting to revisit these poems because they came from a place of like incredible anger and discontent that I'm working through still. But, I love that past version of me. Are y'all familiar with Doubting Thomas, St. Thomas? So Thomas is a disciple, and he's probably most known for what happens post-resurrection, right? So Jesus, he's a Messiah in the Bible. He dies, and he comes back to life. Wild thing to do. And he comes to his bros, and he's like, I'm back. And they're like, I mean, how would you feel? You'd be like, nah, that's not real. And Thomas says, like, you can't possibly still be here. And Jesus is like, literally, like, put your hand in my wound. And there's a really fantastic painting by Caravaggio called The Incredulity of St. Thomas that depicts the scene of Thomas slipping his fingers into the open wound of his friend. And it makes me think about just how intimate that must have been. I've never like shoved my hand into my friend's like bloody orifice before, but Thomas did. The incredulity of St. Thomas. When the Lord woke, he appeared with wounds still open on his wrists, and his friend, in wonder and disbelief, slid his hand against the Lord's still warm torso, touched the gash born from the spear's cruel stab. Baffled, one man reaches inside another man, and blood cleanses blood for once. What is alive in one man comes alive in another. Who has not been dazzled when slipping inside another's body, feeling there something pulsing and alive? Okay, back to this book. I'm going to read 3 more poems, and then we're going to do Q&A. So if you have questions, start thinking of them. Like, why are you so into saints? You're not even Catholic. I don't know. Last year I got to do a really cool project where I, again, this is part of my like weird rethinking religion thing. I was invited by a group of people who do art shows in churches, and they wanted to put the work of gay artists that grappled with faith and the church inside of churches. And like a lot of my fellow artists and poets, we were a little skeptical. So we're like, well, you know, a lot of our artwork is very, it might feel very controversial, very in your face in that space. You know, I think of a friend of mine named Wayne who does these huge sculptures, and on one of them it just says the word like cocksucker on it. And I was like, you want to put that in a Baptist church lobby? That's okay, but you know. And I was really blown away by the reception of these things. We went to a church called Cathwood Baptist Church, and we shared these art pieces, and I got to be part of the sermon and shared some poems. I think the one I'm about to share with you is part of that sermon that I gave. And I was very open about my own struggles and issues with the church, and I was really glad to be kind of embraced by those people, and they were very chill about the fact that I'd come into their church and been like, hey. And it was really great. I think I also read that poem about St. Thomas, just because I really like it. And anyways, that's all I have to say about that. So just the context for this is it was written for a sermon. And it's a sonnet. I love most of the poems in here are sonnets because I like restriction. I feel like it's being tied up, but poetically. Prodigal daughter. What I know of sin, I learned in the sty amid the swine, slurped mud and called it wine. Femme-fouled boy, faggot spoiled sacrifice, offered at the altar and abandoned. Forgive my reckless want, Lord, to belong as more than soiled sacrament, fat sow, knife split to gorge the prophets of gendered violence, prayer in their hands a blade. What do I know of penitence, patience, except once the Lord sent frenzied demons into a drove of blameless pigs to drown. How did we decide which beasts to slaughter? Lord, I too am an impure animal. I left home a son, return a daughter. I've not read this poem at a reading, so I'm going to read it now. It's February, finally. I don't know if that means anything to anyone. And I feel like it was a day very similar to this that I wrote this poem. And I had just read a poem by the poet James Wright, in which he talks about wasting his life in a hammock and thinking about how beautiful it is to waste one's life. So we went and hung out in a hammock. It's called February, South Carolina. In the backyard, we slip off our shirts, lean back in the hammock. We marvel at how our bodies keep changing, our breasts and bellies slathered in cheap sun lotion, the kind with sparkles. I scrape glitter from your skin with my teeth. We are feral together, topless and gently sun-pinked. We sink into afternoon's warm promise and pledge to waste our lives like this, floating just a few inches above the earth. The poem I read, as part of a sermon, there's a word for that kind of poem, which is an occasional poem, right? A poem that is written for a particular occasion, maybe for a presidential inauguration or for someone's funeral. This next poem, and the last one I'll read, is also the last in the book, and I wrote it for an opera. In 2024, I was invited with a couple of other poets to put together a performance where we would perform alongside opera singers, and we worked with a composer to transform our work into what are called art songs. So art songs are kind of like a aria or a solo that is performed outside of the context of an operatic narrative or outside of a libretto. So it's often something someone does as part of a anthology of work or audition piece, things like that. And so this is that. It was a really cool experience. I'm not going to sing it. Sorry. It's called Stay Here. Oh, and one more thing about it, and on the subject of love. We were given one prompt, which was that it had to be about love. And if you've been a poet at all, love is a really abstract word, and one that we're often encouraged not to use in our work because it's so abstract. It's so not serious. And I think love is really serious. And so this is a poem that uses the word love like 40 times. Stay here, an arietta for transons. I love your voice, love your bright noise, your hands. I rejoice in your perfect mascara. Glory your regret, that familiar wound, a harmony you keep out of habit. Love your brittle, love your battle weary, love your fury, your grit, your gnashing heart. Love your kiss tipsy laugh snort. Love you here, love you safe, love you more than everything. Sister, let's praise that ordinary ache. Don't mistake flowers for funeral wreaths. You must breathe a little longer. Stay here. Love you tender as a lipstick-stained ear. You will resist the gilded casket's grasp. and let go of the past restless with ghosts. May the stories of how you've lived outlast every elegy born from your mourning. Let us pray against storms another year we'll spend not leaving each other behind. You find your way back to yourself instead. Let them learn your name before you are dead. Love your name. Love the way you say it slow, like a word you invented. Language forged for your mouth. Love your voice that I tell you. Tomorrow, let me hear your voice again. Thank you. And now we have time for Q&A, question mark? Yes, in the back.
I wanted to ask a question about religion. So, I grew up Unitarian Universalist,
Mhm.
which is, we're the church in town that has a pride flag. And, I never was particularly, like, religious, never have been. If there's something I believe in, it's like love and hope and, goodness in the world. But I wanted to know how long it took for you to start writing about religion and like to find your way back to it, because I, with the climate of the world, I have a rather big bone to pick with the idea of being a Christian in today's climate, and the difference between what that means to some people and what it means to other people, and the loss of connection between that religion and its text and its teachings. And I just wanted to know, like, how your writing has changed around that from how you used to do it to how you do it.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to chat about that. I mean, I should clarify, I guess, like, I'm not a Christian. I don't know if I believe in, like, God. But I do spend a lot of time with Christians. It's hard not to. And so I think that my I think that the way that my thinking has changed is that for a very long time I had a very intellectual curiosity about faith. I thought it was something that was really fascinating to study how people thought, but did not really invest in any like faith practice myself, beyond like the age of 16 or whatever, or 13 maybe. And I think I've experienced like both ends of the spectrum. You know, I've experienced like the extremes of people using like Christian doctrine as like an avenue for fascism, and for, you know, using it as an excuse to be like, I think you should die and I want to kill you. And I've also people who proclaim to like know the same thing, you know, believe the same things, who are like so incredibly loving and amazing. So I don't know. I'm still figuring that out. I try to think. I try not to prejudge people based on their like what they say. Oh, I believe this. I kind of want to get to know them on a deeper level, because I don't know. I can't presume what they believe or how they live. And I feel also like it becomes very obvious after like knowing someone for a while what the ethic of their life is, or how they interact with others. On the other hand, I don't really want to give the Bible too much of a like, you know, I think the Bible is a really interesting piece of literature, but like we're surrounded by really interesting pieces of literature. And I will say my spiritual practice has a lot to do with the stories that we tell each other. And the stories that we tell each other about God and Jesus, they're really interesting stories, but that's just like a very, very, very small subset of the stories that we tell about who we are and how we exist and how we should live. I think of like every book as a holy book, and it's a big part of like my spiritual practice to like read novels and poems and plays and listen to people as well, who tell their stories, and taking that as like a holy experience. So I think that's a big way I've changed, and I think that incorporates a lot of Christian stories as well. I think it took a while for me to not just like blanch at that word, you know, be like, oh, okay, you're one of those, and instead just be like, okay, I'm gonna like take you on your own terms, and not react immediately negatively or have a negative assumption about you because of my experience with some past person. Every person is different. Everyone's beliefs, everyone's actions are different. So I really want to take people at their own word. I was reading something which is kind of interesting. Is I want to say this is in like 1972 or 73. Yoko Ono wrote an article for the New York Times, I believe. And in it, she kind of is thinking about the public's reaction to her. I'm really feeling Yoko Ono right now. Like when we think of Yoko Ono today, she's kind of a figure of ridicule, but even more so back then. Like they were like, her art is ridiculous. It's pointless. She broke up the Beatles. You know, she had like a lot of hate, and you know, the way that she thought about that was like, oh, like, you know, was so much about projection and people's own experiences, and being able to like accept hate and ridicule and still respond with a kind of love and acceptance, even of that is it's one of these things that seems really corny when you say it out loud, but to actually try to live that way, I think is incredibly profound. Sorry, I rambled quite a lot, but I hope I answered your question. Yeah, what's up?
I was really curious about your cover art for both of them. I know you kind of touched on it briefly, but could you just tell us more about
I would love to. Yeah, the book. It's over here. Okay. I'll talk about Slut first. So I've had the pleasure of working with small presses that really encourage their writers to have a lot of say in their cover art. This particular cover art was originally by Silas Berg. He is a collage artist. I'm trying to remember his Instagram handle, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. But he makes a lot of really interesting collages that like marry transness with religious iconography. And there's a lot of poems in here about Saint Sebastian. So when I saw this image, this is Saint Sebastian with the arrow sticking out of him, and Saint Sebastian with these top surgery scars. I just was like, I really, really want to use this. And they actually ended up incorporating some other images from the book into a new collage. So he kind of put it in like a swampy southern setting. This person is holding a peach because peaches are a big motif. There's like a peacock feather because in a poem that's not even in this book anymore, but was in the original draft that he read, there's like a bunch of peacock imagery as well. So yeah. And then the actual designer, who I'm trying to remember who the designer of this particular book is. Kristen Tone. She actually did this like I don't even know what's it called, a ransom letter font. I really like zines and stuff like that. A lot of my work has appeared in zines, or I've created zines in order to put out work. And sometimes like I won't like, it will usually be like in a literary magazine, but then I'll take a work and rethink it for the sake of a zine. It'll be like a poem zine thing. And so I really wanted that to have that aesthetic here. So yeah, that's Silas Bird. This cover for T, a couple of things. So one, I had used the trans artist for this one, and I kind of was like, I really want to like see if I can keep it up and like only use trans artists for my cover artists as long as I can, as long as it's up to me. what the cover is. So I went in search of trans artists. It was a little bit different because I was already familiar with Silas's work, and I specifically wanted a wood block print design because I had published a chapbook years ago called Buggery it was like pale blue with a woodcut design, and I just kind of wanted them to be siblings. You know, they're kind of the before and after of Grief Slut. One really informed Grief Slut. This one is informed by Grief Slut, and so I just wanted them to be like little siblings. And so this has like a lot of like mirrors and kind of like echoes of that earlier work. And then the artist is Ellis Chase. They go by Trash Cowboy Designs, and they make like patches for like, you know, jackets and stuff like that. And yeah, I really like the carabiners. The carabiners like a very like dyke symbol, and having them like linked together feels very sensual to me. And also like the little T for T is also his design as well. It's like two patches actually put together, and our internal designer, Diana Baltog, who's like a really cool Hungarian collage artist, made it a little bit, punched it up a little bit, put the name in there and set everything. So yeah, that's
I know that like growing up here in like the deep south, like where I'm from, is like really hard for a lot of people. It was really hard for me growing up, and like hearing people call me names and things like that, being genderqueer. How has growing up in the deep south, like in South Carolina, and experiencing like instances with homophobia influenced like a lot of your writing?
Yeah. It's complicated. I don't know. Like, I didn't want to write about stuff like that for quite a long time, just because like reality right now feels like so on the nose that if you like made like a TV episode about like things that went on, you would be like, man, that is really like on the nose. You know what I mean? And sometimes that's just true. So I feel like my experience is like that. I really kind of resisted writing about it for a while. I think that when I think about the South, like I really like to write about the South. I write stories about the South as well. And I think it's really almost impossible to write about the South without writing about like social rules that we have imposed upon each other. I think it's also impossible to write about the South without being like haunted by the South's history in every sense. And it was really helpful to me to go back and like learn a lot about like queer South Carolinians. Project I'm still working on and probably will be for a very long time is like a book of poems about moments in South Carolina queer history, and about like what the archives can tell us about these moments and what they can't as well, like what must be imagined versus what can we find, and also like what you can read in an archive is usually based around what has been criminalized. You know, these are the records that are kept. You know, usually there's not a lot of records of like, hey, so-and-so hung out at this person's apartment and got drunk and had a lot of fun. You know, it's instead like so-and-so was like arrested for cross-dressing and then, you know, someone beat them up. So that's honestly been really, I think, powerful to like read about and learn about. I don't know. I think I also don't want to like, I'm always flinty about like trauma narratives, especially around like transness. Like the majority of like trans literature published like pre 2000 pretty much is like a lot of like trans memoirs that tell a lot of the same story, that kind of rely on trauma and then tell like a very linear story of transition. And I want to tell a different story, but it's also hard because like the like oppression isn't going away, you know, like I still want to make sure to reflect that and think about it. But in talking about it, I also want to make sure to like capture some of the joy and some of that. There's a very long poem in this book called Tea for Tea, which is like the title poem, and it's basically about trans relationships. And Tea for Tea is like a originally an internet slang term that would be used on like places like Craigslist, in personal ads. You know, you're looking for like you know, male for female, but T for T is like trans for trans. And it's basically asking the question, well, why would you be in a relationship with another trans person? And you know, there's a lot of joy there, and there's also a lot of safety, you know, and understanding in dating or being married to another trans person. Hope that kind of answered the question.
Got another question.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. What are some authors that have inspired you to write?
Okay, one second. I can grab water. So many. Let me name a couple off the top of my head. As far as poets, some big influences are Sam Sachs, Torrin A. Greathouse is another trans poet. Some kind of older influences, as I'm not alive anymore, is like Allen Ginsberg was one of the first poets I like fell in love with and was obsessed with. Another poet I was obsessed with as a teenager is Dorian Lux, who's actually, I think, lives here in North Carolina, ? And I read a poem by her that like totally blew my socks off in 11th grade and never looked back. Rilke as well, I'm super into. Yeah, those are some poets. Fiction writers, I love like weird fiction writers. Right now I'm reading the new novel by Karen Russell, who's easily probably one of my favorite fiction writers in general. I'm also reading, I'm rereading a lot of work by Kaveh Akbar, who's a poet and a novelist. Again, that's partially because of like exploring spirituality stuff and something he writes a lot about. He wrote a book called Martyr a couple, like 2 years ago or 1 year ago. That's really wild and good. So yeah, those are some folks. And I generally follow a lot of like publishers as well, as I kind of like find the publishers who publish work that I dig, and then I'll kind of, you know, because I don't want to like get in a rut of like only reading the same authors. Like I read a lot of debut novelists as well. So I'll read Hub City Books, Tin House. There's a newer press called Little Puss Press that like only publishes trans books, and that's one I've read like every single book they put out, even though not all of them are good. But it's enough that like they're interesting enough and they're taking risks in a way that I'm like, I'm gonna read them. So those are some kind of off the top of my head. Cool. Do we have time for one more? Or are we good?
Yeah, one more.
One more question. Yes. Hello.
Question about your relationship with form.
Okay.
You mentioned sonnets.
Mm-hmm.
When you approach a sonnet, like, are you starting with a full formal convention? Do you have your own flavor of it? I didn't notice a lot of necessarily end rhymes. Like, what is, I mean, from like, oh, it's as long as it's like 13 to 15 lines, like to I'm going to write a blazingly wonderful Petrarchan sonnet.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how would you conceptualize in form, and then why is that struggle with that constraint important to you?
Great question. This is a dirty answer. So I, for the most part, so in general, writing in form, I really like to like find ways to new forms or modified forms in some way that like accentuates the meaning of the poem or like the subject of the poem in some way. So for example, one of the poems I read called Self-Portrait as Nothing is a contrapuntal. And so like the idea is that it's two halves that you can read vertically, horizontally, etc. I also made it into a sonnet with like kind of like these split syllables and iambs. And, you know, in that I'm thinking a lot about like a transition, like of past and future, of past and present, etc., of kind of bridging a gap in between which there's nothing. Or also like thinking about like the multiple ways that things can be read, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I also have a poem that I call like a truncated sestina, and a sestina is a poem that has a lot of repeating words in it, and so like this one just ends early. It just like ends really abruptly, and the reason it's written like that is because it's specifically exploring AIDS and kind of the legacy of AIDS and things like that. And I kind of wanted a poem that felt prematurely short, that felt like incomplete. Because like that's kind of what I think of when I think of lives, loss, of AIDS. Sonnets in particular, I became really interested in post Grief Slut. I don't have any real, besides like a poetry 101 course in college, formal education in poetry. So I felt like one of the biggest missing pieces for me was meter. Like I feel like I did not understand meter or what it was, and so I kind of challenged myself to write a lot of sonnets. And I learned that I really liked it. Sonnets, or any poem with a strict form, ends up forcing you to make decisions you might not otherwise make in a poem. And so it leads to a lot of surprise. I think that like when we think about free form, we think like, well, free form is freedom, right? Free form is like the ultimate way that we can embrace possibility. But for me, I think having those limitations helps force me into interesting corners. As far as I every poem that is like a sonnet in there is kind of conceptualized differently. So I'm definitely a big fan of like the 13 line sonnet, the 50. I love like just one little thing. There's a, I don't know if any of them are in here, but I definitely have some like rhyming sonnets or sonnets in like perfect iambic pentameter. But I think it depended. There's also an entire series of poems in here I didn't want to read in a library, sorry, that are all about BDSM and that are very constrained, right? There are some really intense constraints in those poems because I am thinking of like constraints in sex and how do those things relate to poetry. So I just think it's funny. I think sonnets are really kind of sexy. I also, I think like a lot of poems can hypothetically have the volta, right, the turn, but in a sonnet, it's like expected to have that turn, that change of argument or change of narrative in the middle or at the end or somewhere in the poem. And so introducing like a necessary surprise, I think is really exciting as well.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. Thank you so much for being here. A few closing remarks.
Let's give another round of applause to Evelyn. Thank you so much for your reading and your insight into your work. It's a pleasure to have hosted you on campus. And if you're interested, Evelyn is reading tomorrow night in Asheville at Firestorm Books with our second visiting writer for the semester, Dustin Brookshire. So if you can't wait for Dustin to come to campus and read, you can watch both of them and then come again on Monday, March 23rd, same time, same place for Dustin Brookshire. Thank you again for taking the time to listen to poetry this afternoon. Thank you to the Humanities Division for their support of this reading series. Thank you for attending this reading. And I believe Evelyn has one copy left of Grief Slut and several copies of Tea for Tea available if you would like to purchase one. And if you already have a copy, please make sure you get yours signed as well. Thank you all for being here and have a lovely evening. Thanks.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, of course. I'm going to turn this off.